And I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 13 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Today the committee will be continuing its study on air defence procurement projects and its study on the National Shipbuilding Strategy. The committee will be considering each study separately. The study of air defence procurement projects will be discussed during the first hour, and the study of the National Shipbuilding Strategy will be discussed during the second hour. Those witnesses discussing air defence procurement projects will make an opening statement of 3 minutes maximum at the start of the first hour. After that, the rest of the hour will be taken up with questions for the members. Those witnesses appearing as part of the National Shipbuilding Strategy will make an opening statement of 3 minutes maximum at the start of the second hour. After that, the rest of the hour will be taken up with questions from the members. The committee has expectations that all witnesses will be open about any potential conflict of interest that they may have. This is to ensure that the committee can fully understand the context of the testimony it is about to receive. If you feel your testimony may be colored by a previous or current interest, I invite the witnesses to disclose this during the opening statement. Today's meeting is taking place in the hybrid format pursuant to House Order of November 25, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely via Zoom. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best we can maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I would also like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not attend the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2-meter physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their masks at all times, including when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room. Everyone present in the meeting must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean the surfaces such as their desks, their microphones, or their chairs with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for your cooperation. We will continue our study on air defence procurement projects. I would like to welcome the witnesses and invite them to make their opening statements. We'll start with Mr. Hubert, then Mr. Nozel, and then Mr. Shamuka, and I apologize if I pronounce your names wrong. Mr. Hubert?
Well, thank you very much. It's indeed my privilege to be here before the committee to talk about a critical issue. The first point I'd like to leave with the committee is the fact that we are heading into a new security environment in which air power is going to be increasingly important. We are leaving behind the type of environment in which we were, of course, able to have us operate in areas of air superiority. We will probably be fighting with enemies in which match us or in fact have superiority. That then makes it implicit that we have a procurement policy and capability that goes beyond just simply providing the forces with the capabilities that they need, but that they also have the capability of being able to replace that capability as it probably will be facing losses going into the future. The second point I would like to introduce into our considerations is the fact of understanding the overall procurement policies of Canada. We have at least two major pathologies that we have yet to be able to deal with. The first pathology relates to the lack of information. There is so much of the process that, of course, is closed to outside observation that is very difficult for us to make intelligent observations and corrections in terms of any types of difficulties of it. There are, of course, lifelong exclusions from sharing of information. And this, of course, makes a critical evaluation or ability to compare to what our allies do very difficult for the outside observer. The second point is, of course, is that our air procurement process is dominated by political decisions. As we have seen from the issues surrounding the Sea King, the F-35, the C-17s, the involvement of the Prime Minister and his highest level of governance to, in fact, influence the overall determination of these decisions ultimately is what, for many outside observers, the major determinant, of course, of whether or not a project is done fast, as was the case with the C-17s, or in fact is done agonizingly slow, as we saw with the example of the Sea Kings. I would end my comments by just observing that the period in which we had the luxury of basically having an air capability that we buy in 1982 and then not thinking about it in serious methods until 2022 are over. We will need to think nimbly, we will need to be thinking fast, and we will be needing to think in terms of the greater international security environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Mr. Nozel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for inviting me to discuss the question of defense procurement objectives, and in particular, the inefficiencies in the defense procurement process in Canada. And in my short 3 minutes, I want to talk about one factor that Professor Hubert's already referenced, and that is politicization. The efforts of a political party in government or in opposition to use a defense procurement project for purely partisan political purposes, to score political points for themselves or against their opponents. And in my view, there's no better example of the corrosive effects of politicization at work than the 25-year process that's been used to replace the CF-18 Hornet fleet. Now, I don't propose to rehearse that sad story here, though if you'd like, I'd be happy to submit a formal account to the committee. Suffice it to say that the games that were played with the CF-18 replacement over the years were deeply embarrassing. They were paradoxical in the sense that MPs seem to believe that votes will follow their gamesmanship on defense procurement, but every piece of evidence we have is that Canadians will never cast their votes as though defense acquisition matters. The games were certainly self-defeating in the sense that playing political games with defense procurement guarantees that what you sow in one parliament, you're going to reap in a subsequent parliament. And finally, they were costly. Playing games always increases the financial costs, but other costs too. They diminish our defense capabilities, they diminish our reputation, and they do a disservice to taxpayers. And so when I look at the 25-year process to replace the CF-18s, there are a number of recommendations. First, follow defense procurement rules. They're generally sound and they're flexible enough. Second, be completely honest about costs. Try to explain to ordinary Canadians how full life cycle costing in defense works and why it's so difficult. Third, explain. Explain as fully as possible the government's thinking about a weapon system. And finally, and most importantly, resist the temptation to play political games with defense procurement. One of my first research projects after I was appointed a professor at McMaster in 1976 was a study with Mike Atkinson of the process by which the Liberal government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau chose the CF-18 Hornet to be Canada's fighter. Fast forward 44 years, when I retired from Queen's University in 2020, the RCAF was still flying those Hornets and the process remains unfinished, partly because of the political games. And in sum, then, I'm hoping that this committee will take a critical look at the CF-18 replacement process and recommend to your colleagues that we need to change the norms about the acceptability of politicizing defense procurement projects in Canada. Thank you, and I look forward to the questions of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Nosal. And now we'll go to Mr. Shamuka.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to testify on these two studies, which I think are of vital importance for the national security of our country. My personal area of research is understanding the nexus between strategy and procurement and politics, not just in Canada, but also internationally, and that will be reflected in my remarks. In my view, one of the major issues facing Canada is that we are far too beholden to our own context, and we fail to look beyond our borders to see threats or to learn from the experience of our allies. this past decade has underlined the importance of air power in modern warfare, including in Azerbaijan and Armenian conflict, as well as the ongoing war in Ukraine. They underlie the need for the Air Force's likely acquisition of the F-35 and the Army's ground-based air defense program, GBAD, as well. The latter is essential to protect our soldiers from air threats on the battlefield, such as unmanned aerial vehicles that have proven so deadly over modern conflicts such as in Ukraine. Yet it will likely take 8 years or more for Canada to field a response. By comparison, the United States developed and fielded several systems to address this threat, including one in under 3 years' time. GBAD is part of our country's underwhelming track record for responding to major threats in a timely manner. Canada's approach to defense procurement has tended to be very platform-centric, which seems to supersede other considerations, including changes to the strategic or technological environment. This is particularly problematic given the challenges facing program delivery. This means that Canada will often procure systems that will have limited utility for newer challenges that may emerge. In addition, many of the public debates surrounding defense do not correspond to a military reality. Much of the public and political discourse over the CF-18 replacement revolved around issues that are over decades old. Most modern Western militaries have long since settled such debates and are addressing much more relevant and current challenges. The platform-centric approach also means that Canada is highly focused on single capabilities to deal with multifaceted challenges. That approach may have worked in the past, but is less effective in the new technological and threat environment that emphasizes multiple systems operating synergistically. A defining feature of military platforms today are their sensor, data processing, and connectivity, which reflect the changes to how our societies now organize themselves. Our military and procurement approaches need to better address this reality. For something like the Army's GBAD program, how we address the air threat should start to focus on foundational enablers such as networking and data links before addressing sensors and missiles. I'll cut my comments off here. I look forward to your questions, and I'm willing to go into any specific area in much more detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of you being so precise and quick in your comments. So we're now going to go into questioning, and we're going to start our first round with 6 minutes with Mr. Paul Hoos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us today. It's very important. My first question is for Mr. Shimoka. We're talking about the F-35. Currently, we're in dialogues. The government wants to have a dialogue with Lockheed Martin. Can you tell us how you think these talks would go?
Thank you for the question. So there are two basic possibilities where this can go. The most likely of the two, which is what happens with virtually every single program at this stage, is that the negotiations with the U.S. government. Now, I should be very clear here. We don't actually negotiate with Lockheed Martin. We actually negotiate with the U.S. government because the way that the structure for the Joint Strike Fighter program operates is that the U.S. government operates the program, and we negotiate with them for delivery time and costs. And our costs are actually the same as what the U.S. government would pay. So the U.S. government, in some ways, acts as an agent in this scenario. We do not actually negotiate with Lockheed Martin. That's a pretty critical point. So in this path, the Canadian government will negotiate with the U.S. government. We will then identify when our deliveries will start to occur, other aspects of the program. This should not be a very long process, given that the U.S. government is very tight about what it can offer, and then we'll start deliveries, or the program will proceed. Okay. We'll have a finalized contract.
Don't.
So currently, you're saying that it's a negotiation with the U.S. government. We're not assessing the technical details. So right now, dialogue has nothing to do with having like a Block 4. We're not there. That step is already concluded?
That there's limited capacity in this sense, because basically we are one of many partners, and the program with the path by which we can acquire the aircraft is very much determined about what is available. So there's very little room for us to sort of negotiate, whether or not what we're going to, like, the costing is basically set unless we do some modifications to the aircraft, which we're not really looking at major ones. And that's the case. So we're going to get Block 4 aircraft, if that's your specific question in this case, because there is no Block 3 aircraft remaining, or there's no slots to procure the aircraft at this time as a Block 3. It's now Block 4 is going forward. Okay. There's a second possibility, if you give me a second here, and I think this is what the Minister of PSBC highlighted, which is highly unusual and very unlikely, but it should be raised, is that if negotiations do not pan out and that we would go to the second bidder. This has never happened before for a major defense project and is a concern among many, I know, because that would basically push us to go to the second bidder, which was Saab, and commence negotiations there. This would be highly, highly unusual, and I think that raises significant consultations given what we know of how the assessment for selecting the F-35 within Canada went, and what we know from other countries as well.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shimoka. Mr. Hubert, my question for you is this. In the Liberal policy, is it adapted to hypersonic missiles?
The answer is no. You can go through in terms of what they're talking about in terms of NORAD modernization, and that's the major effort that we see in terms of trying to respond to the entire northern missile threat, which is predicated on responding to an ICBM threat, not a hypersonic. Hypersonic requires a different set of sensor capabilities. It also requires a different type of response capability than anything that is mentioned within Strong, Secure, and Engaged. Strong, Secure, and Engaged goes as far as to recognize that the geopolitical environment is changing, and particularly changing in the northern aspect, but beyond in terms of any direction that it provides for any negotiations in terms of this capability, it's not included.
Merci.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, Mr. Shimoka. You mentioned that Canada had the worst procurement system. Can you explain how so? And I think the Americans are doing a better job. Can you explain this?
Absolutely. So when I made that statement in a Hill Times piece, my view is that Canada often takes an inordinate amount of time to deliver major systems. And what's really the part that I think is really problematic is that the time that we take compared to our sort of allies, the United States being one, oftentimes incomparable. But you have to realize that we're often acquiring off-the-shelf systems that have already been completed. They require minimal modifications in order to get them into Canadian service. Whereas if you look at our allies, the United Kingdom or the United States, they will often, they take the same amount of time, but they're often basically developing systems right off the ground, a system that does not exist. And they're basically developing, fielding it, testing, evaluation, and putting it into service in the same amount of time. A good example is what I was talking about before with the Army's air defense program. It's going to take 8 years from 2017 to 2025 for Canada to field an air defense system. By comparison, the American government in 2015 realized that air defense threats were a major threat towards their soldiers, and they put in a program called MSHORAD. And that took 3 years from the development and from the identification of the threat to development to the fielding of that capability and putting it into service. And so if you look at the range of Canadian programs, procurement programs, this is a common thread, is that it takes us much longer for us to just acquire systems that already exist, that already are in service and are ready to go.
Thank you, Mr. Shimoka, and I appreciate that. And if you have anything further that you'd like to add to that, if you want to put that in writing and submit that to the clerk, we will distribute that with the committee members. Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Baines for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests for joining us today. My first question is for maybe Mr. Hubert. Russia's war against Ukraine now creates new security concerns for Canada's Arctic territory. When asked about the capacity for the F-35s to operate in Arctic conditions, a recent witness told the committee that several other Arctic nations are currently using them for Arctic missions. Do you have any concerns about the F-35's Arctic capacities?
None whatsoever. Where we can learn clearly is the theater in which the Norwegians began to operate. Norway was one of the very first countries to go with the F-35. And I mean, Richard can correct me. I believe it was either even the Block 1 or Block 2 that was actually acquired by the Norwegians. They have had complete success. There have been no reports of any difficulties in terms of Arctic conditions. They had to do certain modifications in terms of running on ice-covered runways and sort of technical aspects. These are all issues that can be shared with us. The other countries, of course, that have looked in terms of gathering the F-35, the Danes took about 2 years to decide. They actually weren't going to go for a fixed-wing fighter. The Ukrainian war, of course, starts in 2014, and it was after that that they decided that, yes, they needed to go to fixed-wing, and they took about a year and a half process to decide on the F-35s. They will be preparing to be able to operate off of Greenland in a future date. And of course, the most recent of our northern friends that have gone for the F-35s are the Finns. Once again, takes about 2.5 years for them to decide. They've cooperated closely with the Norwegians to ensure that any of the difficulties of operating in cold environments, of being able to ensure that you can take off and land on ice-covered runways are taken care of. And the expectations are, and what all three of our friends and allies tell us, is that there's absolutely no problem that is not solvable.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm going to switch over to maybe Mr. Nossel. On July 16th, 2010, the Harper government announced that it would spend $9 billion to acquire a new fleet of 65 F-35s in an untendered sole source contract. Upon being elected in 2015, our government decided to commit to a new competitive bidding process. Do you think this was the right decision?
I think that the problem for the sole source decision of the Conservative government was that it wasn't really explained very well. A number of other of our allies have gone sole source. The Australians, of course, went sole source, and that is largely because of a decision made by the United States back in the mid-1990s, a decision that essentially the United States would only operate one fighter aircraft in the 20s and 30s, and that was going to be whoever won the JSF, which was, of course, the F-35. And so there was a logic behind the Conservative government's choice of the F-35 as a sole source. I personally think that they got it wrong in the sense that they never fully explained to Canadians why sole source made such sense. The Liberal government, or the Liberal leader during the 2015 election campaign, promised that the government would, in fact, not buy the F-35. The process since 2015 has, in my humble estimation, been a nice reflection of the games that have been played, and my proposal to the committee is essentially to take a look at that process with the possibility of trying to avoid gamesmanship in the future.
So just in the process of fairness, like, was that fair to the applicants, the new process?
I suppose so, in the sense that there's a huge logic, as most of the witnesses who've appeared before this committee have suggested. There's a real logic to the F-35, and thus an illogic to some of the other contenders, and that's one of the reasons why so many of the other contenders just simply said, we're not going to be part of this process.
Right. So in a recent CTV News article, you expressed that one benefit of the past 12-year process has been to reduce the level of political interference in military procurement. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, look, I think that the proof will be in the pudding, as they say. I don't know whether or not in future procurements we're going to see a reduction in the political games. I'm not here, by the way, talking about political interference, as our colleague Jim Ferguson said to you, all procurement is political. I'm talking about turning a defense procurement project into a political football. And let's put it this way. We'll see whether or not future generations of politicians will be able to and be willing to avoid the temptation of transforming this into football.
Okay, and just to get finally some of your thoughts on the F-35 and its improvements, do you have any insight on how they may have improved and what that would mean for their capability?
And excuse me for interrupting, and Mr.
Sure.
Baines, the time actually had ended, but if Mr. Nussel, if you got that question, if you would, it was a great question, and if you could maybe provide an answer to us in writing, it would be greatly appreciated if you just submit that to the clerk. Thank you very much. We'll now go to Mrs. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hubert and Mr. Nosal, my first question. You both mentioned how the politicization of procurement has been and still is a problem both for national security but also for our finances. The taxes of Canadians and Quebecers are used poorly in this way. I would like you to both answer quickly, if possible, despite the big ask. Can you describe what a procurement process would look like if it was not political? Completely neutral procurement process.
You want me to go first?
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
If you want a really good example of a process that was free of this kind of politicking, look back in history to the time when the government of Canada replaced a number of fleets of jet fighters with the CF-18 Hornet. The Liberal government of Pierre Elliott Trudeau managed that particular process excellently, and it was not at all politicized, except right at the very end when the Parti Québécois government of René Lévesque was involved. But essentially, I think that still remains, after all of these years, an excellent example of an unpoliticized process.
If we're looking for a process, the identification of the threat has to be center. Once again, on something that Richard had said, the manner in which we look for platforms is also part of the problem, because that gives for the temptation of the politicization. What we need to understand is that when we talk about the replacement for the F-18s, we're talking about providing for Canadian security in an increasingly dangerous aerospace environment. And so I think that you have an educational process, that this is not about making jobs, this is about giving security. And that has to be something that is constantly rammed home again and again. The second process is, of course, and we saw this to a certain degree with the creation of the shipbuilding strategy that we'll talk about in the next hour, is that you create your independent capability of your experts, and basically you have the politicians promise that we set the parameters of what you have to do, come back and tell us, and make sure that what they tell is, of course, shared publicly so that there is no sort of a suspicion in terms that the fix is in on it. Once you have that decided upon, and then once you make the decision on the platform that you are buying, you take a lesson from what the Finns have done and what the Danes have done, and that is simply say, okay, we will now let our Air Force go negotiate with the Americans or whomever you are negotiating with. You've got to have the product, it's got to come back, and it's got to present into the Canadian security. And if you educate, if you set up the rules of the game, and if you have openness in terms of the processes that do not have to be kept secret for security reasons, then you can have a very depoliticized process.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shimuka, among your areas of expertise, one of them is about defense procurement, like your colleagues. About fighter jets and capacity, do you have the impression that the evaluation criteria now or in the past are fair and equitable? Just to be clear, we say fair in English. So are they fair and equitable for all suppliers? Mr. Shimoka first, and maybe after Mr. Nosal and Hubert can comment.
So I think it's good that you've pointed out the word fair, because I think that's a really difficult thing. It's a difficult part to sort of parse out. The problem is that this can't be almost an equitable fight or equitable sort of competition. As Mr. Nossel pointed out, the Joint Strike Fighter program is much newer than many of the other options, except for the Gripen. It's significantly more capable, and it was basically Canada's participation within the Joint Strike Fighter Partnership Industrial Benefits Program should have given it a very large leg up on all the other options. So what you saw in 2010 was, when the initial evaluation was done by Department of National Defense and the government, that the understanding was that because it's much more capable, significantly less costly, and industrial benefits were so much more skewed to the F-35, that there was no competition required, that it would waste taxpayers' dollars to undertake a competition at that time. Now we fast forward to 2015 and the current FFCP process. At that time, they had to change the evaluation criteria in order to give other options the ability just to compete, because there was no way for them to compete in a lot of sort of capability areas, in the industrial benefits aspects, fairly, or to at least have them have the plausible chance to even win. So when you say about fair, it's a very difficult challenge to make a competition where one capability is significantly more capable and less costly and whatnot, so that other ones can even have a chance to compete.
I can jump in very quickly here. Fair has nothing to do with it when we're talking about the security of Canadians. The aerospace industry has fundamentally transformed itself since the 1970s, when in fact we could have different airframes competing on what we misuse the term fairness. You're really talking about competitive. The reality is that we have a focus of construction. We need to have that long-term understanding. And this is all these type of efforts that the Americans put into creation. And when you talk about protecting Canadians from the rising geopolitical threat that is coming from the Russians and the Chinese, that when we start talking about fairness and the time that it wastes and the money that it diverts from what we should be focusing on, I have problems with that, to be perfectly honest.
Thank you, Mr. Hubert. And we now will go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes.
Thanks. I'm going to go right back to Mr. Hubert. You talked about the geopolitical threats and how it's changed. Even maybe you can speak about, this process started over a decade ago, and so the needs and everything shifted. So can you talk about the flaws in our procurement process right now, and also just in terms of level 3 partners? I think you identified Denmark is having somewhat of a better process than we have. Can you speak about where there's good processes in procurement and where we can look at those models and what we can do to update ours so that we're, not in such a bad situation that we're in right now?
Well, I'll start off with the point that Richard raised, and that is the reality that aerospace threats today are a system of threats. In other words, we have to get out of this mindset that somehow dogfights and individual capabilities of the airframe that we're talking about is what is going to give us the security as we engage with the enemies that we will be engaging upon in the future. We need to have the ability to converse with all sensor capabilities. In other words, if the fighter can actually see the enemy that it is trying to take out in today's warfare environment, it's probably too late. You're probably already dead at that point in time, given what missile technology, given what surveillance and sensors are now doing. So in other words, it's all about having that domain awareness. And that's the strength that the F-35 brings to the fight. And this is why people like the Finns are going for the F-35 rather than the traditional Griffins or Swede materials that they go to. You have to know, in terms of the ability to win in an aerospace fight, you need to be able then to anticipate what your enemy is doing. And that means you also have to have missiles that can reach that range. See, we start talking about a system, and you need to be able to keep your aircraft airborne. And so one of the things we haven't talked about is the fact that modern day air fighting requires tankers to a degree that, of course, we always forget about. And it's that part of the unglamorous part of air power that we need for the procurement system. Now, once again, when we look at the Danes, when we look at the Finns, what they started with in both of their processes was not so much, okay, what's the airframe? Because to be frank, the Finns wanted to stay with the Swedes. They liked that relationship, but they recognized that the growing aerospace threat that the Russians are now bringing with their hypersonics, with their next fifth generation fighter capabilities that they bring to the battle, that in fact that they had to have a system that was based on the pure protection of Finland, Denmark. You get that solved, that in fact that you are responding to a threat, and that speeds the system and focuses the mind incredibly. And we don't seem to see indications of the political interference once that decision was made. And now, of course, what we see is that there is a certain even more urgency for them to acquire this capability.
Great, thank you. Mr. Nozzle, in a 26 publication, you argued that due to Canada's geopolitical position and voters' poor appetite for defense spending, that Canada should focus on specialized military capabilities instead of developing all possible capabilities. Can you talk about which specialized air capabilities that Canada should focus on? And also, has your position changed on those specialized capabilities since that publication, and if so, how?
First question. What kind of air capabilities? Look, I have a very different view than Professor Hubert on this one. There's only one question for me, and that is, what are the Americans flying? Because of the crucial importance of air defense of North America, still after all of these years, for me, there's only one question to be asked and answered, and that is, what are the Americans flying in the defense of North America? What then are we going to be flying? They won't let us fly F-22s, but they're going to be flying F-22s and F-35s, and so we need to be flying F-35s as well. And so from that point of view, that's the reason why, in response to Madame Vignola's question, it really wasn't fair, but that's another issue. On the question of going after niche, look, the one thing that hasn't changed since I wrote Charlie Foxtrot in 2015-16 is Canadians have not grown any less cheap about defense expenditures. They may be willing to increase the defense budget in the shorter term, given what's happening in the world. But the essence is Canadians are still extremely cheap, and therefore we need to tailor our military along the lines of what actually Canadians will agree to purchase.
Mr. Shimoka, you cited, you were talking about internationally, how there's different processes. Can you cite or point to a country that has a good procurement process that Canada should look to?
That's a complex question. So I think there are segments of procurement processes that we see internationally that we can look to and say, well, that worked, And I think if you look at United Kingdom has had some successes, the Australians have as well, and the United States is another country, and also France. So I would specifically look at some programs that have actually achieved costs and their cost targets, capability targets, and also industrial development or technology development, right? So an example I've raised before was the MSHORAD program in the United States. I think the examples of how Mr. Hubert has discussed about how Finland or even Switzerland have identified selecting the F-35 in their cases are examples. It really depends on what you're looking at. And one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing right now is basically trying to get software enabled capabilities, which is kind of this next generation of capabilities that are really critical for situational awareness and identifying, targets and prosecuting targets. And those are big challenges. And the United States has made some really big steps in trying to get those capabilities faster and deliver them to their warfighters quicker and on cost. And I'd probably look at those efforts there.
Thank you. Thank you. We will now go to our second round of questions, and we will go to Mr. McCauley for 4 minutes.
Great. Gentlemen, thanks very much. I'm just going to ask the same question of the three of you, and I'll just ask if you just take about a minute and a half to respond, starting with you, Mr. Hebert, and then Dr. Nossel, and then Mr. Shamuka. The issue of the buck stops here, responsibility with procurement. How do you see it best set up for Canada? We see repeatedly departments that come before us, ministers, and there's never a straight answer of who's responsible for a decision. Our system is very clearly broken. How do you see us tackling that as a country?
Well, it gets even worse because we've allowed almost no room for failure within the individual departments. In other words, we look at the penalty of what happens when someone has been delayed. We see in terms of the individuality within, say, D&D, and we'll see the accusations. And you can talk to the individual involved. It often freezes activity. And then we get to the very top aspect. And once again, because of the diffuse nature, the way that so much is hidden from view in terms of what is happening, we can't see who was the political leader that said, yes, we will delay on this decision, or yes, we will go forward. Yes, we will ultimately make it happen. There is an increasing inability to understand that.
How do we tackle that then?
Doesn't go.
How do we tackle that then?
We have to have a willingness.
I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, we had PSPC, and we're asking about the potential delay of another year for the F-35 decision. And it's like, who made this decision? Well, we did as a government. Well, who? Well, we did as a group. Who? And it's just passing the potential blame around.
We can take a little bit of a lesson. We can take a little bit of a lesson from the Japanese. The Japanese actually, what they do in terms of their major procurement, and they're the one example we haven't talked about at this point, they have bipartisan acceptance. Part of it is because they have the shared view. It doesn't matter if it's the Liberal Democrats, if it doesn't matter if it's a Socialist Party. There is a recognition of the growing Chinese threat. And as a result, you have that ability. Then their submarine program probably stands out as one of the very best of procurements that we can talk about. I know that's for the second hour. But in terms of bringing together, if instead, and it goes to the heart of what Dr. Nossel was saying in terms of the political gamemanship, if we can create a norm within the Canadian government that this is not about Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Bloc Québécois coming ahead or showing that they're getting their individual ridings, but in fact for the security.
I can interrupt you briefly to give Dr. Nossel, and then Mr. Shamuka, I'll get you on my next round. But Dr. Nossel, do you want to chime in?
Thank you. Yes, I think that there's always a tendency to want to follow the Australians here, because the Australians tried an experiment with creating a separate Department of Defence Procurement. Now they've abandoned that, but what they've done is essentially put their defence procurement back under the authority of the Minister of Defense. And so that when we think about changes that we could make, my own view is that we need to get rid of this tripartite view of procurement and industry and national defense, and recognize that what we're talking about here is a national defense expenditure. And that means that ideally the Minister of National Defense should have that authority. That's what I would be inclined to do.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, gentlemen.
We will go to Mr. Housefather for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I really appreciate all the witnesses being before us today. And I think from all sides, we agree that defense procurement should not be politicized. I don't think that is something that, would be in doubt. And I think all of us have to live up to that on all sides. So that's, I'm in complete agreement with that. What I am interested in hearing is you talk about transparency, and a lot of what you're saying is right. The more people understand where things are in the process, the more people have a factual basis for understanding why decisions are made, the more concretely they'll understand decisions. On the understanding, of course, that a lot of negotiation is confidential negotiation between suppliers and the government, and pricing and many other issues are proprietary, and you've got to be careful. In order to improve transparency, whatever the government in place, what are the steps within the procurement process where you feel that transparency can be improved, taking in light the other considerations that may be involved, such as confidentiality in terms of customer-supplier relationship? I guess I'll start with either Mr. Nosel or Mr. Hubert, because you both mentioned that.
So let me suggest that one of the ways has actually already been mentioned by Professor Hubert, and that is the idea of creating at the parliamentary level committees where individual MPs of all parties would essentially be bound by the kind of confidentiality requirements that you refer to. And it seems to me that would be one way that you could increase the transparency so that you don't get the kind of frustration that Mr. Macaulay felt when confronting Simon Page. It seems to me that's the way, one of the ways of a key way of doing it.
The other thing that has to be brought in is that we have inversed the role of secrecy. Instead of demanding that we prove what needs to be kept secret, the assumption is we need to prove what can be released. And I think that part of the process will be better served if, in fact, that as we go through all those issues that you talk about, that there is, in fact, a requirement for secrecy, you need to demonstrate where the secrecy is, in fact, required, and then you assume that everything else is open. Once again, we go back to the one example of the creation of the shipbuilding strategy. And remember, that is a rarity in which the document by which the decision was ultimately formulated was released publicly. So in other words, there was an ability and a recognition amongst those that were crafted to come up with the strategy to be able to defend what their positions were without betraying any of the secrecy requirements. There are the techniques by which we can make sure that real information is shared, secrecy is protected, but only if you have the political will to do it. And so once again, we're left with that horrible reality that all of this is possible, but it has to have the buy-in of the Prime Minister.
Mr. Chair, do I have any time or am I done? 35 seconds. Well, first of all, thank you both for those answers. I mean, I think we're in a government where the Prime Minister is not by himself. There's a cabinet-style government, so certainly cabinet needs to consider how to be more transparent. All cabinets do, and across the world and in Canada too. The last thing I just wanted to say is that it's come up before, but I just want to remind everybody that if you don't have a fair procurement process, you can have complaints filed at the CITT, which would delay the purchase of equipment even longer than if you have a fair process. So we always have to weigh all of these different factors, and I think there's no perfect answer, but you got to get the best marriage possible. And I really appreciate all your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. We will now go to Mrs. Vignola for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hubert, I'm going to go with you. we've been hearing something for a few weeks, how our radars are outdated and more. From my point of view, this is a personal point of view, this is particularly important for the protection of enormous northern and Arctic territories that we have in Canada. We can't undo the past, but I would like to hear what you'd like to say about the most effective technologies we could use to protect the Canadian North, how much of them we should have, or any other comments that you might find relevant. Thank you.
Well, we can talk immediately, of course, is that we do have to update the existing architecture of the North Warning System. In other words, the Russians are in the process of modernizing not only their nuclear war fighting tactical capabilities that we see with the Kazal missiles and other types, they are also modernizing their ICBMs. And so we have to continue to have that capability to monitor that threat. And that means the radar systems have to be updated. We also have to have the ability, however, to be able to detect the Kazals, the hypersonics, and that requires, of course, systems such as the over the horizon radar. But it also requires a mobility. In other words, the Arctic is so large, you are not going to be able to have the old-fashioned dew-line system where you can string a set of radar sites across and have a high degree of confidence that you're going to catch everything. You've got to be able to have an anticipation. That then means you also have to be developing new space-based systems, because the only way that we're going to have a proper surveillance capability of being able to anticipate what the Russians are doing in terms of the aerospace, and I would add the Chinese as well, going into a little bit longer future, is you need to have radar sensors. Now that means obviously that we have to tie ourselves much closer with the American space weapon systems, and that of course will be problematic for some people on a political basis. There's another part, though, is you also have to have the ability to respond. So it's not just simply having these three-layered sensor systems. We also have to be talking about what it means in terms of ABM's capabilities, what it means in terms of being able to take out these hypersonics. And that's another layer of anti-ballistic missile. That's anti-missile systems that are something that we are also going to have to do unless we're willing to have the Americans simply ring us around and do it entirely for us.
We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 2 minutes.
Yeah, I'm going to expand on that. You know, we know that the F-35 has an operational range of about 1,100 kilometers, which suggests the need for refueling capabilities. You just talked about some of the infrastructure we might need. What other additional infrastructure do you think that is required to support fighter jets in the far north year-round? And should Canada be making these investments now, given that we're heading into this? And also, do you think we should be purchasing specialized refueling planes? So I'll go back to you, Mr. Hubert.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, once again, because of the difficulty of getting information, there are suggestions that have appeared in some media reports that, in fact, our ability to actually, on a spur of the moment capability, to deploy our aircraft into the hangars, particularly in the middle of winter, is problematic. There are issues associated with sort of bread and butter issues. We have issues on whether or not the runways of our 4 forward operating bases can actually provide the ability of all aircraft, including Americans, which of course we have that shared aerospace under NORAD. So if the Americans are sending in their very largest refuelers, can they in fact operate out of the forward operating bases? And I don't have the answer for that. So we need to have the 4 forward operating bases, but if we actually start putting the over the horizon radar, that means going to the northern tips of our Arctic archipelago, and that means having some facility beyond Resolute and Eureka to be able to resupply, particularly on the western part of the Arctic. And so all of that infrastructure has to be worked out and brought forward.
Do you also see, like in terms of critical path to getting there, you know, and ensuring these aircraft have the equipment, pilots, maintenance? How are we doing on that front, on the human resource side? Do you see us having challenges there? No, we can't hear you. We can't hear you, Mr. Hubert.
There we go. We are getting media reports that we are losing pilots and that we are not able to sustain. And it goes back to a point that I was raising earlier. Not only do we have to have pilots that can fly the existing fleets that we have to have a surplus, because we have to assume going into the future, if we move from this environment that was relatively low conflict, definitely low tech in terms of any capability, we will also need, and this is part of the procurement issue we have not dealt with at all, is we will need to replace pilots that are lost in combat or wounded in combat. And at this point in time, I don't think that we have a very good ability of having any flexibility in that.
I'll go to Mr. Lobb for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate everybody's comments today. And I'm relatively new to this committee overall, but for many years, I've felt that there's just way too much politics in everything, but especially in procurement. And so my thought is, what is so wrong to have a committee put together of experienced members of Parliament that would ensure taxpayers' dollars are protected and make sure that we're getting the right equipment for the Canadian military? Is that such a far-off thought where we could do our jobs? So, Dr. Hubert, do you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. First of all, I'll remind the committee that in days of yore, House of Commons committees actually provided some of the most cutting-edge information of understanding the international system around us. Bill Graham, when he was head of the Foreign Policy Committee, produced a report that I still make students read on understanding the future of security in the Arctic region. So the committee system in Canada has the ability to bring along some of the very best minds for producing this. We've seen the manner by which committee systems, of course, can oversee things such as intelligence within CSIS. So there is no difficulty of saying that there has to be a certain secrecy requirement in which all MPs have shown in the past that they are mature enough to be able to accept. And once again, it then creates that bipartisan understanding that we can all agree that we are dealing with a threat that ultimately has to protect Canadians. And I think that the sense of loyalty of anyone who wants to become an MP in the first place would be very well situated for in such a creation.
Yeah, that's my estimation. And I think back to the time of the F-35 over a decade ago. And I think if we would have had a committee of all political parties involved in a spirit of goodwill to try and do the right thing, we would have realized that if the U.S. is going with F-35s, Canada's going with F-35s, and we would have worked out a way to make sure that taxpayers were protected as well as getting the best fighter jet for Canadians and for the military. So maybe it's not lost on us yet that we can maybe make some changes going into the future. The other thing is, and I know Mr. McCauley's touched on this as well, it's very frustrating, the secrecy. When different civil servants come here, and I'm sure they're all great people, but you get no answers. You get no answers on anything, transparency. And, you have decisions, billions of dollars, maybe one or two cabinet ministers know exactly what's going on, maybe one, maybe two. And in the public service, how many exactly know? It's way too much power, way too much secrecy for that kind of money getting spent. Any thoughts on that? Anybody can answer that one.
I'll make a quick stab at it, and I wouldn't mind if I could respond later to Mr. McCauley's directly. I think that this is a challenge. And part of the problem is that each department that is involved within the procurement process has their own perspectives. They have their own objectives. It is not purely the delivery of a capability alone. It is getting costs. The process is a major focus of PSPC, the industrial benefits. And when you get into into the defense procurement process with all these groups together, I think that's where you start getting this issue of lack of transparency. All the individuals in that process are not willing to kind of stand up and say, well, I'm in testimony to stand and say, what's the issue or what is the where's the problems with the process, right? Because they have to operate within that collegial format. So I think that is a major issue that you're seeing in your discussions.
5 minutes left, but I'll cede my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shamuka. We, unfortunately, due to time, we'll now go to Mr. Johari for 4 minutes. And Mr. Shamuka, perhaps in the next hour when you're here, that you might be able to address with Mr. McCauley when he gets a chance to question you. Mr. Johari.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. In the interest of time, I'm going to start with Dr. Hubert. When discussing NORAD modernization, you've indicated that the popular metaphor for the objective of this modernization is that we need to enhance both the shield and the sword. And I know NORAD is a system, is referred to as the system of systems, and there is a very active dialogue going on between upgrade and expand. If you can expand on the shield and sword, and where are the areas of the shield that we really need to enhance, and where are the area of the sword that we need to look enhancing, as well as the interoperability that's needed within the NATO allies, especially in the Northern, I would really appreciate it. And if you could close by highlighting where in the procurement process we need to make sure that we enhance and optimize the process so we don't have another 7 years.
Wow. I got more than 4 minutes. I mean, a brilliant question. And it's really to the heart of why we are talking procurement. We're talking procurement because we have a new geopolitical security environment. Traditionally, we've mainly needed the shield because that was the essence of deterrence. As long as the Soviet Union knew that we would know when they launched the missiles, so the Americans could then launch their missiles and we could all die in mutual suicide, the deterrent of actual nuclear war was stopped. And so the emphasis, once the bomber threat faded and we moved into the missile age, meant we needed the shield. And that's why we had the emphasis on the DEW line and then subsequently on the North Warning System. We now, of course, need the sword, because we are dealing with systems that are directed towards tactical nuclear war. They are of a speed and a stealth capability that simply letting the Russians know that we know that they have one of their Tupolev 95s armed with a nuclear-tipped Kassel supersonic, hypersonic missile that is ready to fire is no longer deterrent enough. We need to convince the Soviets, or Russians, I should say, sorry, a slip there, and I suspect the Chinese going into the longer term, that we can in fact shoot them down. And so that's where we need both the shield and the sword in this context. And so we need that surveillance. We need all of that we talked about earlier, radar sat, over the horizon radar, the satellite assets with our American allies, but we will also need the capability of what the F-35s with refuelers will bring us to be able to shoot down incoming threats. And we haven't even talked about the maritime side, but that's the next hour, I suppose. And of course, we need to be able to, at the same time, be able to know that when the Russians sell their smart ICBMs, that we can say, okay, we know you fired them, and so let's commit mutual suicide. All of that is expensive. It's difficult to actually comprehend, but it's about deterring, and deterring by being able to fight. And that's something that's new in terms of our thinking, in terms of procurement.
So I got about 30 seconds left. So now that we are focusing on our shipbuilding, we're focusing on improving our NORAD, or modernized NORAD, as well as supplementing it with the proper air defense, which is being negotiated. Are we moving toward a very secure, safe, and strong commitment that we had made?
More so, but once again, we haven't talked about the submarine threat. We haven't talked about underwater autonomous vehicles. We haven't talked about whatever the Russians and Chinese come up that we haven't anticipated. I mean, once again, the Kassel missile is seen as something that has surprised people, even though they've been developing for a long time. What is in the current arsenal that the Chinese and Russians are developing now that we have not anticipated, that we need to respond to? And it's that dynamic thinking that we need to be bringing to the entire procurement process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hubert, and thank you, Mr. Johari. And that brings us to the end of our air defense procurement hour. We're now going to just suspend for briefly. Before we do, I just want to thank Mr. Noso for your testimony and your participation today. And you are welcome to stay logged into the meeting, although you won't be participating in the next hour. But we do appreciate your comments. So with that said, we're going to briefly suspend while we bring in just one more witness, and I declare the meeting suspended. Welcome Ms. Sloan to our meeting, and we have with us Ms. Sloan, and we have Mr. Shimoka and Mr. Hubert with us. And we're just going to have some opening statements. The witness will start, and we'll just 3 minutes, please. And we'll start with Mr. Hubert, and this is on National Shipbuilding.
Thank you very much. The first one, and I want to reiterate because I can't make this point enough, we're heading into a new security environment, which is going to increasingly put pressures on Canadian maritime security. This maritime security, of course, faces a threat from the ongoing battles that we see occurring in the ongoing Ukrainian war. But it is also an area in terms of the Asia-Pacific region, which is increasingly going to become an area of conflict. And as a result, we need to ensure that we have as nimble and as a capable procurement for naval capabilities that we have. We also tend to, the second point I would like to make is once again, reflecting what we talked in the first session, we have almost a perverse desire to focus on platforms rather than understanding that what we need to have in terms of responding to the development, Chinese and Russian naval threats that are now developing is a system of system. We can't just simply talk about the development of an AOPS or the development of a submarine or a surface combatant, but we have to talk about what this ultimately gives us in effect in the ability to be able to fight as the future environment will obviously put pressure on. In terms of the types of challenges that we face in terms of how we meet this future threat, we of course had a very good start with what was the Canadian shipbuilding strategy, an effort to try to introduce a certain rationality in terms of how we approach these particular issues. And one would dare say that once again, we are seeing a certain element of politicization as the issue of whether or not we should have 2 yards or 3 yards have come in. But we've also seen the other types of difficulties where we are only focused on what the cost and cost difficulties are, rather than asking how are we able to fight, how are we able to resupply, how are we able to repair. I will end my comments by saying that it is a good start to see the AOPS actually coming into operations. I will be happier when we start seeing actual construction on the future surface combatants, so that they're actual surface combatants. And we are going to have to address the issue of submarines sooner rather than later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hubert. We'll now go to Mr. Shimoka.
Thank you again. My views on shipbuilding, and specifically the Canadian Surface Combatant Program, are largely derived from my paper on this topic, released several months ago. In it, I went through the history of the program and identified key factors and objectives that guided the CSC program, 3 of which I find are particularly relevant for this discussion. the desire to recreate a sustainable domestic Canadian government shipbuilding industry, the need to acquire highly capable vessels for the Royal Canadian Navy that can seamlessly operate alongside allied navies, and the lack of project management and design capacity within the government of Canada, resulting from cutbacks to the procurement workforce in the 1990s into 2000s. The first two are policy choices the government may be able to alter, but the third is a capacity and experience issue that cannot be easily addressed. It must be rebuilt over time and at significant cost, which has helped determine how the program has unfolded. It led to the umbrella agreements, in which the shipyards took on a much more significant role in the production and management of the CSC. My side did not suggest that the CSC is an optimal outcome. Like many other government programs, it is a product of a less than ideal set of compromises, circumstances, and intents. Still, it is difficult to challenge the program's outcome unless the government is prepared to modify either its desires to build these ships in Canada or accept a significantly less capable vessel. To put it bluntly, there are no free lunches in defense procurement. The CSC experience is not totally out of line with our allies' experience with their own programs. For example, the recent US budget submission suggested that the cost of their first Constellation-class vessel, a very rough comparison to our CSC, has gone up over 30% in the past 2 years, from $900 million to $1.3 billion US dollars, with the Congressional Budget Officer suggesting it may go as high as $1.6 billion. A good factual comparisons and understanding of challenges of establishing a shipbuilding industry is essential. I do not believe there's an easy approach to find major cost savings in the CSC program, as it is currently constituted, even with a different ship design. There might be opportunities to curtail some costs by reusing the existing hull design to produce a less capable vessel, but even that brings a whole host of other challenges and may not result in cost savings. I'd be happy to discuss them in further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shimooka. And now we will go to Ms. Sloan. 3 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. And I'll start by saying that I agree fully with what Mr. Shimooka and what Mr. Hubert just said. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak here today. In the past 10 years, since the government signed umbrella agreements with Irving and Seaspan to be strategic partners in building combat and non-combat vessels, as we know, the projected costs have escalated and the timelines have continually expanded. A key contributing factor from the outset, in my view, has been the lack of an appropriate governance structure for shipbuilding in Canada. An interdepartmental committee of deputy ministers chaired by the DM of PSPC governs the shipbuilding strategy, as everyone here knows, with decision-making shared among DND, PSPC, and Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada. Responsibility for moving the shipbuilding strategy forward lies everywhere and nowhere. Britain has recognized the problem with the committee approach to government activity as complex as naval shipbuilding. Like Canada, Britain has faced significant cost overruns and delays in building their naval vessels. In its 2017 National Shipbuilding Strategy, Britain announced a new shipbuilding governance arrangement. It created a cross-government sponsor group chaired by the Deputy Chief of Defense Staff with representation from many ministries, and this group owned the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Well, just 2 years later, an independent review of progress in implementing Britain's shipbuilding strategy found that the sponsor group did not appear to be strong nor effective and was primarily used to share information. Another independent review into national shipbuilding governance structures found that, quote, activity across departments was fragmented with a lack of alignment and empowerment and without clear lines of authority. The British Prime Minister responded to this in the fall of 2019 and appointed the Secretary of State for Defense, so our equivalent of Minister of National Defense, to be the government's, quote, shipbuilding czar, and this term has been assigned formally. The Secretary of State for Defense and shipbuilding czar, as he introduces himself, is the single ministerial level appointment responsible for implementing the national shipbuilding strategy in Britain. It brings together the input from other government departments. A national shipbuilding strategy refresh that came out of Britain about a month ago went still further and created a national shipbuilding office that reports directly to the shipbuilding czar. It's led by a rear admiral that's been appointed chief executive, and the office is responsible for driving forward the shipbuilding strategy. There are many concerns surrounding the ships of Canada's national shipbuilding strategy, including costs, timelines, and in the case of the CSC, the Canadian Surface Combatant, possible performance issues around weight, for example. In my view, a fundamental underlying factor behind many of these issues is the lack of an appropriate governance structure that assigns accountability for progressing Canada's national shipbuilding strategy to a single government minister.
You, Ms. Sloan, and for the witnesses, just so you are aware, you probably assume, but the documents that you provided to us, we have distributed that to our committee members, so they do have them in advance and are aware of things. So if you missed something in your opening remarks, they will have seen that. So we'll now go to questions, and we will start with Mr. McCauley for 6 minutes.
Great, thanks very much. Mr. Shmuka, actually, I'll just tell you quickly, I was Googling you, and when I put in your name, it comes up, is Shmuka alive? So I think I can answer that one. Very odd. I know, I was just looking it up and it came this up. Mr. Shmuka, I just want to ask you quickly, how do you think we best build up in this short lead time better project management? And then maybe the two others, you can answer that. We obviously have a shortage. Do we contract it out to our partners, our allies in the States? How do we, build this up so generations from now we're not repeating the sins of today?
I think that what we've done in the past couple of years here, and I know that you've had Mr. Perry discuss this as well to some degree, that there has been a significant push to increase the procurement workforce, and we've accelerated a number of individuals up, basically promoted them. I would look to the United States and also the United Kingdom and utilizing some of their educational institutions. The United States has Defense Acquisition University. There's various courses within the United Kingdom that can kind of help us accelerate sort of the development of that knowledge. I would suggest that maybe looking at Canadian Forces College or other areas and developing a real expertise of an institution that has the expertise to teach our individuals within our government to better operate within this environment and really develop that. Because if you look at other countries, you have people who move up the system, who have decades of experience in how to undertake procurement. They have MBAs and whatnot, right? That give them real management, knowledge and capacity. And we don't really have a similar situation in Canada, and I think that really hurts us.
Anything you can think of in the real short term, next year, 2 years, 3 years, that we can do to address this? This is a longer term.
This is a longer term problem. It's similar in business as well. Like this in the public sector, in the private sector as well. You can't create somebody who can operate a $100 million, $1 billion program and manage that. It takes time to sort of develop that capacity. Maybe we can hire people from the private sector. That might be a possibility. That would require significant changes to how we sort of administer the human resources side within the departments and within government. But that might possibly, but that's also fraught with challenges as well.
Ms. Sloan, do you want to chime in? Ms. Sloan?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Sorry. Searching for the unmute button. I appreciate it's a challenge. It's a long-term process, and it needs to start now. And I think the starting piece is appointing that one person who's in charge, who can then develop the workforce over. It will obviously be over several years. The workforce to rebuild that project management capability that was decimated in the mid-1990s, but the starting point needs to be now, and it starts with one person, and then rebuilding in that manner. It won't be easy; it'll take time. But yesterday would have been better, but today's the best time to do it.
Great, Mr. Hubert. Dr.
Yeah,
Huber?
absolutely. I mean, I first of all agree with everything that Richard and Eleanor say. There's one point the committee I want to really stress on the committee. Building a naval ship is a very difficult challenge. The Americans are just about to literally junk an entire new class of vessels. They're Freedom class littoral ships that were supposed to be sort of like corvettes. They can't make them work. They've spent billions. They will be scrapping them. They've spent probably about $2 billion extra on getting their Ford aircraft carrier class working. And so we have to appreciate this is a long-term, very difficult challenge. And so we need someone at the top who will both benefit, will gain, give them political payoff for doing a job well, also hold them responsible. But there's a point that Eleanor raised. We need to constantly have systems by which we review what is happening. The success of the British system is that they were willing to look at what they tried, and then they had an independent capability to ask the question, is it working or is it not working? And we tend to say we will create the sort of the means of making it work, and then we never come back to it. There has to be the acceptance that this is dynamic, and there has to be the acceptance that, of course, that there is a fair system of review to see if, in fact, that we've got the problem that the British ran into, or if we're actually solving it. And that's a mindset that also has to come forward.
Accept and be open that things could fail and might fail. Right. Just quickly.
And actually do fail very badly. Let's be very clear. Naval construction. The French built an aircraft carrier that could not land their largest aircraft. They had to put the de Gaulle back in after she was out for they took her out for the first sort of tryouts and discovered that their anti-submarine aircraft could take off, but they couldn't land it. And I mean, you sit there and say, how did you get that so wrong? This is the challenge of shipbuilding in a modern era.
Like we have to be ready to walk away from something that's not working rather than pour money into it. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Kazmierczuk for 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm excited to be able to ask a question of Professor Eleanor, or Professor Sloan, actually, as a Carleton University grad myself. You co-authored, Professor, a paper on agile procurement, matching the pace of technological change. And recently I came across a terrific quote from the then Air Force Chief of Staff, General David Goldfein, who said, when he's talking about fighter jet procurement in the United States, he said, I grew up flying fighters, and I will tell you, when I see the F-35, I don't see a fighter, I see a computer that happens to fly. And the challenge of technological change applies to warships as it does to fighter jets. And so, Professor, I just wanted to ask if you can comment on the role of agile procurement in the national shipbuilding strategy. What role does it play? And second question, I know that you're currently undertaking a study that's funded by the SHIRC. It's a research project on naval shipbuilding that compares the UK, Australia, and Canada. And I just wanted to ask you, what are the differences in how different shipbuilding programs around the world keep pace with the fast pace of technological change? Are there lessons that can be learned from some other countries, and where is Canada at in terms of being able to keep pace with technological change?
Well, thanks very much for those. Thanks very much for those questions. In terms of agile procurement, really we're talking about applying a business model to government procurement, which can be very difficult. And so agile procurement, of course, in the business world, things turn around very, very quickly. If you were to create, let's say, a shipbuilding czar in Canada, in the form of the Minister of National Defense, then that person could not only drive the rebuild of procurement officers, as I understand that there were 1,200 or 1,500 procurement officers working on the Canadian Patrol Frigate back in the early 1990s. We don't have that capability right now, so that's the part you need on the government side. But then that office could also drive the business plans, the business methods to bring in agile procurement capabilities in into the shipbuilding strategy. So all of that would be driven from the top, from the shipbuilding champion. So yes, absolutely key role because technology changes so quickly. In terms of the 3 different countries, the UK is, all countries have problems with shipbuilding. Canada has its problems. Australia's had lots of problems, and UK has problems. The UK, I would say, is responding most quickly to the problems it's had. So the problem it had was sort of one big shipyard that built its ships and got very behind. And so they decided to break this up into several shipyards that would build different vessels. And also they adopted an export strategy, which is another whole conversation. They are building in agile procurement and complex technologies through the process of breaking up the different locations into hull builders and technology components. And the component, a warship is about 80% computer and 20% hull. So much different, let's say, than the AOPS, which is or Coast Guard vessel. And Australia has had a number of things it's learned in terms of how to build a ship, other things that we can possibly apply here in Canada. One of the things that Australia learned was don't build modules in different locations and try and bring them together into one location, because they had trouble with that with their Hobart class, their air warfare destroyer. Britain's going the opposite direction. It's building modules in different places around the country. I think that Canada will want to take note of the solution that Australia found. I don't think that we'll want Britain's, of course, a small country and can build things in different locations. I don't think Canada would want to do that. So we're building our modules, let's say at C-SPAN, and putting them together at C-SPAN. I think that's a good idea. So different learnings from the different countries. Not sure if I've answered your question.
Yeah, and so would you say that Canada does a good job in its system in terms of bringing in innovation and adapting to technological changes as it designs and implements and builds these ships? Are we able to keep up to the really fast technological changes that are taking place every single day on the software side, on the computer system side? As you said yourself, 80% of a warship is a computer now, is a software system. Are we doing a good job in terms of keeping up with those technological changes relative to other countries?
I think so. Really, that's a company question. So Lockheed Martin is doing a very good job in keeping up in the technology changes that are. I apologize. I think my dog's barking. As the combat systems integrator, the Lockheed Martin is doing a very good job in adapting to technology needs in Canadian surface combatant. But there are other aspects within Canada that are lagging because of the lack of capacity in National Defence Headquarters in ADMAT to truly drive all of this. And so it's a capacity issue in terms of many of the elements in the shipbuilding strategy.
And I didn't let your dogs cut into your time.
Yeah, I apologize.
And with that said, we'll now go to Mrs. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I'll continue with Mrs. Sloan. Mrs. Sloan, in your opening remarks, you talked about the lack of governance with shipbuilding. You described the process that the UK has used to improve their governance. Decisions made by the UK, did they lead to the expected results? Were these decisions, could they be transferable here? And finally, which country gives the best example for shipbuilding? I understand that every country is struggling with this right now. Shipbuilding is not easy. But who is doing the best job with governance to make sure that the decisions are taken quickly, that the right decisions are made, and that we're using our taxpayer dollars wisely?
Thanks very much for that question. There is no, as I understand it, Germany does a very good job, but I have not studied Germany, and so I can't answer along that. In terms of the UK, Australia, and Canada, the three countries I've looked at, basically nobody does a good job. Everybody has trouble, and that's why all three countries have been looking at possible solutions. And so in terms of the transferable lessons, I think the modular one is transferable to Canada. As I mentioned, I would not build in different locations and bring things together into one location. Australia learned that the hard way. In terms of whether or not Britain's new sort of top-down shipbuilding czar is working, there are a few. It's only been 2.5 years, and already they've decided to centralize it still more with this National Shipbuilding Office. But there have been some successes in the British system. One of the successes that Britain's documentation, for example, its National Shipbuilding Strategy refresh that was released about a month ago, it talks about export success. It's had some, and one of the export successes that it talks about is exporting to Canada, the Type 26, and to Australia, the Type 26, and then the Type 31 to Portugal and Indonesia. So some of the ways in which they're doing things are starting to have traction. Britain has experimented with a number of different things over the past 10 years, and this is where they've arrived at. They have seen problems and tried to adapt to the problems, where I would say that in our case, we see problems but have not tried. We haven't changed our defense procurement strategy since 2014, since the Committee of Deputy Ministers, and yet we haven't seen any progress. And so I think it's time to take a relook at that.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Sloan.
Thank you, Mrs. Sloan. I'm going to go on to Mr. Shimuka. In a report that was published in 2021, you said that Canada should move forward with the choice that it made for the combat surface ship, even though it's imperfect. What are the risks associated to the model, and how can we reduce these risks, both for the shipbuilder and also for taxpayers?
Thank you for the question. One of the challenges I think that we have to realize is that we've already invested quite a bit of time and effort into the CSC as it currently stands, and any further delays to the delivery of these vessels will also incur significant costs, because we'll have to modernize the existing Halifax class vessels in order to serve well beyond what there was the original life expectancy. So I think that's a dynamic that currently exists, and that we try and backtrack or make a different decision at this time will certainly, will incur further costs. I'd like to point, Dr. Sloan's comments about centralizing the governance structure, providing better sort of reporting and understanding of where we are in the process, I think is very helpful and very useful to sort of deliver better outcomes in this case. But we're also at a very crucial stage within the program. They are undertaking basically some of the most complex aspects of integration, specifically of the radar and on the vessel, and modifying design. So, at this stage, in the coming months and the coming year here, I think we'll have a much better understanding of what the costs of the program are, and what is the value for money. It's just at this specific stage we are now that I think that there's a lot of challenges, and it's fraught. We don't know fully exactly where it's going to go at this stage.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Vignola. We'll now go to Mr. Johns for 6 minutes.
Thank you all again for your important testimony. One thing that, in my community, I live in Port Alberni, British Columbia, and the Port Authority there has been trying to build a dry dock, and there's been no government program to build a dry dock. Transport Canada doesn't have a program in existence. And they have the only deep sea port on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And they have a great company, Canadian Marine Engineering. They've got all the ingredients to take on this work. Now I was at the Pacific Northwest Economic Region Conference, and we heard loud and clear that there's very little to no dry dock space between Oregon and Alaska. And even companies are booking dry dock space, even though it's not even being utilized, just to reserve it, to make sure that they've got space available to them. And I think I really appreciate Ms. Sloan talking about having a shipbuilding czar, because clearly Transport Canada isn't talking to procurement. We heard from the PBO that shipbuilding costs are really high because of the lack of shipbuilding in Canada, that there was a lot of shipbuilding capabilities lost over the last few decades. And I'd love to get your take on it. Like, I know BC Ferries wrote a letter in support of our floating dry dock, citing that they're going to do $3.5 billion to $4.5 billion worth of infrastructure and new vessel purchases within the next 12 years, and they're spending $150 million in annual ship repair. But they cited the biggest constraints is scarcity of dry dock space. Now, these other yards actually impact the bigger yards, as you know, in terms of capacity. Can maybe, Ms. Sloan, if you want to speak a little bit to that, and what other countries are doing in terms of their strategies. Like, we're losing out to Poland and Turkey, as we know, and Norway's created a strategy where they're developing capacity even in rural coastal communities. And we've got the longest coastline in the world. Maybe you can speak about that, and I'll let others chime in as well.
Sure. I mean, the core element of the national shipbuilding strategy is the idea that there can't be too many shipyards. It's meant to be a long-term thing with ships continuously over the years. The problem with Canada's shipbuilding and I've looked at shipbuilding since about World War I, actually, and we've had many shipyards, upwards of 40 yards running at the same time. You can't have too many in Canada, and so that was one of the core elements of the national shipbuilding strategy, to have fewer yards and a long-term plan. So the fact that we're not churning out a whole bunch of ships right away is almost good, because that's the whole point. It's supposed to be over the long term. That said,
sorry to interrupt. Maybe you can help me better understand. On the West Coast, for example, BC Ferries has cited that this is one of their biggest constraints, is actually getting dry dock space to meet their needs. So they're doing a lot of work in other countries. And so I worry about us not having a strategy to deal with the needs and demands right now of many of the different companies, because we heard from the PBO that it is actually, critical in terms of labor costs as well to have more shipyards. So we're getting two different arguments, that we should be concentrated in those markets, especially the markets that we're concentrated in are some of the highest cost of living markets in the country. Housing's gone through the roof. We know that the cost of living is massive. So would you not think that it makes sense to develop more capacity to help lower the burden on those big yards?
Yeah, I mean, you've got me thinking on this, because the National Shipbuilding Strategy refresh that I mentioned that was released on March 10th in Britain, a big element of that refresh was to look not just at naval vessels, which is what I've looked at, naval vessels and the big Coast Guard, but also the whole marine industry. And that shipbuilding czar is now looking at the full capacity within Britain, not just naval vessels. And what you're talking about would be, I guess, a refresh of our national shipbuilding strategy to take into account those other dimensions.
Does anyone else want to speak to some of the concerns and issues I'm raising, especially when it comes to the smaller class vessels?
It's not so much the smaller class vessels, but you're talking about dry dock. You're talking about sort of the support facilities that are associated. And once again, the shipbuilding strategy is about a specific platform, a set of platforms, Coast Guard, Navy. It's about basically what type of ships are to be built in that, but it doesn't deal with sort of the supporting infrastructure. And it goes back to a point that Eleanor was raising, that if in fact we extended this to say that it's not just about building of the ships, but going beyond, and it gets back to some of the earlier discussion we were talking about in terms of runways and airports, is that we need to break the system where in fact we only look at the construction of a ship. We only look at the construction of the AOPS and say, okay, we got to be thinking about the system. And obviously a dry dock is part of the system in terms of the overall maintenance. And this is something that, of course, is always kept separate. And that's why you've run into the political problems of not being able to get the fundings necessary to proceed. I'm not saying necessarily that you would get the fundings in such a system, but if we extended the overall parameters placed under the czar that Eleanor talks about and says, okay, your parameters is not only for the ship, but also how we sustain it, I think that would go a long way for at least giving you an avenue for being able to bring such proposals forward and actually have a hope of having them supported.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hubert. We'll now go into our second round, and we'll go with 4 minutes with Mr. Paul Hoos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to start with Mr. Hubert about submarines. We talk a lot about planes, about surface combatants. We don't talk about submarines. I know that it's difficult to get information for you. You said it at the start of the meeting, but I was wondering if you had information about how things are progressing on that front.
Well, I can tell you we're definitely not talking with our American, Australian, and British allies as they move forward for the consideration of Australia's next submarines. I can tell you that as when we don't have submarines, as we had in the period between the O class and the upholders, we lost control of Canadian maritime sovereignty because we didn't know whose submarines were coming into our waters, near our waters, because that information, even from our friends, is not shared, and that we absolutely needed. But once again, because submarines are expensive, because they are complex, because when they succeed, they are out of the political discourse, because if you're not hearing about them, if they're not grounding, if they're not running into the issues that assure, everybody thinks that they're not important. I can assure you that they are completely essential to the security of Canadian maritime security, and particularly on the West Coast coming into the future. And it astounds me that at this point in time, we seem to have some discussions in terms within the Navy, at least, is trying to drive the agenda. But from the political side, and we keep bringing up this issue in terms of the political interest, we don't seem to see any mobilization of the recognition that we shouldn't just be talking about subs today. We should be having a plan, just as the Australians are doing, to have the next generation, or as the Japanese are doing, or any of the other countries that know that you need them for the security against the Chinese threat.
Okay. Thank you. I have a small comment. I had the opportunity to go into a submarine 3 or 4 years ago. It really changes things to be underwater for 24 hours. We just see things differently. So it's just a comment. Mrs. Sloan, would you agree to say that until we have a minister in charge of military procurement for defense, it would be impossible to... Inaudible to the interpreter.
It would be impossible to move. It would be impossible to move forward, I'm guessing was the question. Yes.
Oui, merci. Excusez parce que mon micro a ouvert et fermé.
I'm sorry, because my mic turns on and off on its own. So, of course, having a minister responsible for military procurement is important. But on the other side, there's a responsibility question. What do you think about the private sector that ends up deciding the process? Is this a reason that could justify why costs are increasing for several projects?
So once again, it comes back to a capacity issue. And if you don't have a minister in charge and the staff working within that organization to support the minister on this particular file, on shipbuilding and on submarines, then somebody else is going to do it, right? So this is probably how Irving ended up being prime, right? There wasn't government capacity to be prime for the CSC. So Irving ended up being prime. And so you'll see this in any of the military procurements. If government doesn't have the capacity, if government can't move forward, then industry starts to fill the gaps. And that's when you'll see industry, sort of taking over and having cost increases that you mentioned. Once again, it comes down to that capacity issue.
To Mrs. Sloan. We'll now go to Mr. Baines for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question's around recruitment. I'd like to ask Mr. Shimuka, in a recent article by Global News, you commented on where extra spending should go towards recruitment. And I want to know, like, in terms of our academic institutions, especially here in British Columbia and Richmond, we have the British Columbia Institute of Technology. They have a world-class aerospace campus. They also train for shipbuilding. What does this all mean for these academic institutions? What can they do to support the strategy in Canada?
Thank you for the question. I think that they are trying to some degree, but at the same time, I think the employment opportunities for the Canadian Armed Forces and also the government writ large aren't as well known, especially out on the West Coast, because we do not have large government institutions like in Ontario or in other areas. I think it's an incredibly critical area. And this goes back to the nature of warfare that we're now sort of witnessing develop, where we see cyber capabilities, the ability to bring in large amounts of data and sort of fuse it into a picture, into a usable intelligence picture that we can actually undertake operations with. Those require really technical ability of individuals that we see that are sought after by social media companies, by tech companies. And so there's a large competition for that level of knowledge, or those recruits that are coming out of those universities. And as a result, DND often loses out, right? Like if a person who's able to do very large data analysis and devise algorithms to put it all together, that person's highly sought after by Facebook, right? And then there's the Canadian government who's out there who cannot offer a salary that's close to what a Facebook, engineer can, right? And as a result, we often don't get the best, and often we don't even get looked at because these people are. So I think we have to maybe look at what the remuneration is for some of these very specific roles, but also show off some of like the benefits of working for the Canadian government, because a lot of people do want to work for the government because they think it's important to protect our country and whatnot. So I think that it's a much larger conversation that obviously we can't go here, but I think it's really, really, really critical.
Okay, thank you for that. My next question, I'd like to ask Ms. Sloan. Past procurement problems have fostered distrust, which produces more oversights than reduce efficiency. You've written that it will be necessary to build trust back up by accepting a trade-off between risk and results, and by accepting that failure is part of the learning process, not a reason to stop moving forward. What would this look like, if you have any suggestions?
Well, I think in terms of it would look like less bureaucratic paperwork, less levels of checkoff in terms of things going through the government system. And I think that's what I was referring to, is that there is such a risk-adverse culture, if you like, within the procurement system, the military procurement system in Canada, that things just get progressively tied up. And so it's more of a bureaucratic paperwork system that needs to be reduced so we can move forward more quickly on projects.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Baines. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 2 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you very much. My question is for Mr. Hubert. We're seeing prices rise for ships. We've talked about it before. One of the reasons, not the only one, is the steel, availability of steel and the increasing price of steel. What measures can Canada take to be less dependent on price fluctuations for steel?
Well, it's a little bit of a silly answer, but it still is true, is that expand Baffin Island. Baffin Island has probably one of the world's largest deposits of iron ore. And, if we were producing it and actually refining it here rather than sending to the Germans to be refined, that would be one way. But the reality is we are going to be completely at the control of the international market for steel. We've been that way since the Chinese entered.
Okay. And thank you. You know that in Quebec, we have a large iron mine, and it also processes the iron. Unfortunately, in Port-Cartier exports what it makes. So we'd have to maintain our resources here and process them here, and then we'd be less dependent on less reliable sources from China, for example. Is that what you're saying?
You're on mute, sir.
I don't know how, given the globalization, our participation in a free trading system, particularly for natural resources, how we manage that. Look at the difficulty we had in just trying to deal with the Chinese gold, or attempt of the Chinese to buy the gold mine in terms of any type of instrumentation that we have. I mean, it is an ongoing problem, but it gets a little bit back to something that Eleanor was saying, in that the real cost of warships is in terms of the computers and the technical side. The steel tends to be a relatively minimal part of any of the hull that you're going to be buying. So I don't have a good answer for you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. We'll go to Mr. Johns for 2 minutes.
Thank you again. I think I want to go back to Mr. Hubert about the systems. The lack of system in place here. We talked about maintenance, and we clearly know that there's a big issue on capacity issues. I mean, BC Ferry says this is their top issue is the scarcity of dry dock space. The shipbreaking, even the end of life of vessels, we don't have a plan. Typically, Canada ships a lot of our vessels to Bangladesh and to other countries to deal with shipbreaking. So, we need to be more responsible, whether it be environmentally and on a human rights issue, because we know when we're sending those vessels overseas how there's been child labor and human rights issues related to that, but also about building capacity. And the PBO identified that there could be cost savings if we expand our sector. Now, other countries have implemented tariffs. Even Canada had one, a 25% tariff on building ferries in Canada, which they removed. That was $118 million a year that could be invested into supporting our shipyards. Maybe you can speak a little bit about policy, about the need for coordination between departments, so that we have a strong sector with skilled workers and reduce costs overall if we want to have a robust shipbuilding sector in years to come.
The simple answer is that Canada is a maritime country, but we have what's called, of course, is seawater blindness. The central agencies, and particularly the political elites, do not understand how much of the maritime domain of Canada is actually at the heart of both our security and our prosperity. It takes a political decision to turn around and come up with the type of creation of an overview. Now, once again, it could be put under the czar that Eleanor talks about, but we need to break this political blindness to how important the oceans and the ocean's resources are to Canada. And that's something, I mean, I'm getting to be old at this. And I mean, once again, I'm always shocked at how much Canadians, particularly Central Canadians, forget of the importance that we have and therefore are not willing to engage in the type of study that would establish the type of structure that we would then need. Japanese do it pretty easily. The Americans do it. The British do it in a much more expanded way. I don't know why we can't.
Hubert, and thank you, Mr. Johns. We'll now go to Mr. Paul Hughes for 4 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I would like to thank our witnesses from today. I hope that they'll come to see us again soon. I think for all of us around the table, their presence is incredibly relevant, and they understand this file. And with that, I would like to table a motion that I gave notice of last week. Here's the wording of the motion: that the committee order the production of a copy of all of the documents, signed or not, connected to the coalition accord between the Liberal Party and the NDP, where the Prime Minister that speaks to the commitments of the coalition, and that the committee report these documents to the House. Mr. Chair, my motion is considered compulsory given how everything went down on March 22nd when the Prime Minister told Canadians that he had built an alliance with the NDP. This alliance will allow the government to make extraordinary expenses, and we have no idea what kind of expenses are coming. As parliamentarians and members of this committee, it is our duty to make sure that the contracts, procurement, and government spending are all done correctly. Being part of this committee, this is part of our job to see to this, and that is why I am tabling this motion, and I hope that my colleagues will agree unreservedly.
And just hang on for a second. Thank you very much, and thank you for that for Mr. Paul Hughes. And before we start, I think when I look at the time frame that we're in right now, I would like to first off, as we're going into a debate on an issue, I would first of all like to thank the witnesses and thank them for being with us. And I would say that we would dismiss them at this point in time because when I look at the time, thank you all, Ms. Sloan, Mr. Hubert, and Mr. Shmuka for attending and your witness and your testimony today, and we greatly appreciate it. But with that said, I will dismiss you from further
Thanks very much.
Meeting. Thank you. So with that said,
Thanks very much.
I would like to indicate that to the committee that when we receive these motions that have been put for us, I always look at them one-on-one to make certain that they are acceptable or admissible to what we've done. And I will usually discuss that with the clerk. I will research it myself. I'll talk to speakers and others that I know along these issues. So with that said, I've looked at the standing orders on this particular motion. And basically, according to Standing Order 108.3C, it sets out the mandate of the Government Operations and Estimates Committee, including under subsection 1, and I'll quote, the review of the report of the effectiveness management operation together with the operational and expenditure plans of the central departments and agencies. So with that said, the Prime Minister's office is the most powerful of the central agencies and is supported by the Privy Council office, which is the most powerful central agency within the government. As well as it's suggested throughout from some people that I've discussed that this might be a political motion. I would answer that with the The press release announcing the agreement between the Liberals and the NDP on March 22nd, distributed using Government Canada resources, and is posted on the Prime Minister's departmental website. If this was a political party matter, then and not a Government of Canada matter, that announcement and press release would have been posted on the Liberal Party of Canada website and distributed by the Liberal Party of Canada. Further, this agreement includes a commitment from the Prime Minister that his office and his government will pursue specific policies and legislation as part of the agreement, which will require the management from the Government of Canada to implement. Will be part of the operations and central agencies and will require the expenditure of funds to achieve the agreement upon policies. Subsection 7 of Standing Order 1083C also includes a quote, and I will quote, the review of and report on the process for considering the estimates and supply, including the format and content of all estimates documents. So with that said, where this agreement is titled Supply and Confidence Agreement, this agreement falls under the business of supply, and therefore I would consider this under the mandate of the committee for review. With that said, I will consider this as admissible, and so at this point we're open for debate. Mr. Paul Hughes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned when presenting the motion, for me, it's quite obvious that we need to have the signed documents, if they exist, that detail this coalition agreement between the two parties, especially because this relates to so many upcoming expenses and it has a direct effect on parliamentarians' work and of our own committee. I think we need to shed some light on this, and this is part of the democratic exercise. It's simple. The motion is not designed to provoke. It's really just seeking to get the information we have the right to have access to. Well, yeah, you know, my dear colleague disagrees with me. My colleague from the NDP obviously supports this agreement between the NDP and the Liberal, the Prime Minister of Canada. You guys decided to make a plan for the next few years. That's up to you, but we just want to know what the negotiations were, what was involved, what documents were signed on this supply and confidence agreement, which I believe is a simple request on the part of the official opposition. I think that the Bloc would also support the idea that this kind of agreement should be made in a transparent fashion, and this is in the interest of all Canadians.
Thank you, Mr. Paul Hoos. I see Mr. Johns' hands up. Mr. Johns.
First of all, not to provoke. This is extremely provoking. It's frivolous. I believe it's outside of the scope of this committee, Mr. Chair. We have been completely transparent. Our agreement is public. Our leader has spoken publicly about it. And, I think the Conservatives should actually stop playing games. Instead, they should be trying to help people. What we're doing here is trying to help Canadians. We did that through COVID the whole time, and that's what this deal is about. And it was the Conservatives that complained about an early election, Mr. Chair. They complained every day about an early, unnecessary, unfair election. And now we want to make sure that we have stability to get people help, the help they need. And if it's the NDP is the big bad boogeyman because we want to help people get their teeth fixed, so be it. But I'll tell you, children need help. Seniors need help. People living in poverty, they need their teeth fixed. They need access to medicine. They need a place to live. And we need to truly move forward with reconciliation and climate action. And that's what we're doing here. And I'm absolutely blown away that we lost an opportunity to ask more questions of witnesses and do what we're supposed to do here at this committee. It's absolutely appalling. So instead of getting help to Canadians, another motion like this comes forward. Absolutely disgraceful. That's my input. I will be voting against this motion. He can go on, that member can go online and see the agreement himself. It's there, it's public. and it's publicly there because we want people to know we are here to help people, not play politics.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I see Mr. Housefather.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also believe that this motion is out of the scope of the committee, but out of respect for the chair, I did not challenge you on that point. I think we can just defeat this motion, but I do want to say that I have always hoped that this committee would work together in harmony, would work together across party lines, que nous avions l'opportunité de travailler ensemble sur beaucoup de choses.
That we have the opportunity to work together and tackle many important issues. I lost my chance to ask my questions because I was following Mr. Paul-Hus.
If Mr. Paul-Hus was really trying to get this motion adopted, he had no discussion with anybody on this side to try to gain support for his motion, to explain to us his motion, and in the end result, it's inherently political. Parties in this House negotiate and discuss things with each other all the time on House strategy and many other things. If people want to start going after some documents, others on this committee could start going after a lot of other documents and spend all of our times in frivolous games as opposed to actually moving forward with really important stuff, which is, by the way, the study that you guys put forward on air defense and the national shipbuilding strategy, not us. We delayed our studies to hear this one. So in any case, I will be voting against, and I hope we don't have this happen too many times, because I think it will, in the end, create more friction than it's worth. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Kazmierczak, and then Mr. Paul-Hus.
Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to echo the comments that were made by my colleague and also my colleague across the table as well too. You know, we're studying two of the most important defense procurements in our country's history, and the situation that we're seeing unfolding in Ukraine only adds to the urgency of this work. And this was a study that we agreed upon. This was put forward by conservative colleagues because we understood how important this study was. And we had today three really important witnesses before us that had incredible, remarkable expertise and experience that they were sharing with this committee, including a graduate of the Royal Military College of Canada, someone who had spent 6 years in the Department of Defense and is now an expert in her field. And of course, I'm talking about Professor Sloan. And it's concerning to me, and it's disappointing that my colleague, conservative colleague, grew bored of their testimony, so much so that we cut their testimony and their appearance before this committee short, information that is important towards this critical study. I felt it important to put that on the record. I think it's unfortunate that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle decided that they wanted to play games at this incredibly important pivotal time in terms of defense procurement and in terms of geopolitics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kazmierczak. Mr. Paul-Hus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Listen, we can play these games as long as we want. I waited till the end of the meeting. I was using my own time to table this motion. Yes, maybe, Mr. Housefather, I stole a few minutes from you, but I'd like to remind everyone in this committee the basic premise of this agreement with the NDP. When the Prime Minister announced this on March 22nd, he said that there was Parliament wasn't working, committees weren't working, and that we had a problem. And we came back here after the election, and things had been going really well. We had a work plan. There was no fighting. We were cooperating really well. Things were going great. So this political decision was the agreement between the NDP and the Prime Minister, and this is what's causing the problems in our committee. Because before that, everything was going fine. And we wanted to move things forward, and we wanted to move forward with defense procurement. So don't blame me or us for making this request today, because the political game was between your leader and the NDP's leader. On our end, we played no games, and the Conservative Party was not playing any games. I think that we were being very cooperative in all of the committees and in the House. We were working together to move forward with Canada's interests. So I think that our motion is normal, considering the circumstances. And like I said, I waited till the end of the meeting so that we wouldn't spend 2 hours discussing this and wasting the time of the witnesses that were here today. But let's remember the basic premise. The Prime Minister said that we had an operation problem at the House and in the committees, and we did everything that we could for things to go smoothly with everyone in the spirit of collegiality. Thank you.
Mr. Pauhus, we now have Mr. Macaulay, followed by Ms. Vignola, and then Mr. Johns.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to address a couple points. Yes, I understand our NDP and our Liberal colleagues disagree with this motion. That's fine. I would wish that we stick to the facts and the faux outrage. We were at the end of time. We were not going to have any more witnesses. As someone who's had the pleasure of sitting on this committee now for 6.5 years, I can state from January 2016 was when I put the first motion on to study this. To sit in here, my Liberal colleagues go on about, oh my God, we're delaying this important study for May now, or April now, 6 years and 4 months. The Liberals have delayed, pushed back this study. So again, disagree, and we can get on to stuff, vote, and we can get back to work, but let's end the fake outrage and the, I hate to say the fake news, but the bending of the truth about some of the stuff that we have been doing here. Thanks.
Just to reiterate, I would ask that everybody be respectful of each other. I know you do. And just to realize when temperatures get heated, that sometimes get, so please be respectful of that throughout. Ms. Vignola.
Merci.
Thank you. As far as I understand it, the agreement has been made public. I think it was published on the Prime Minister's website. Am I correct? Okay. If it's already public, this is my question. Why table this motion? Are you concerned that certain aspects of the agreement have been hidden from the public? Why are you tabling this? I'm trying to understand. I need to understand, and now I don't understand because it's public. So why?
Johns, I know you're up next. Do you mind if I get Mr. Pauhus to answer that question before we go to you? Thank you, Mr. Pauhus.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question. Indeed, the result of the agreement has been published. So everything that the NDP requested from the Liberal government is there, but what we don't have is this agreement mentions supply and confidence agreement. The Bloc and the Conservative Party are not a part of this. No one asked the Conservative Party if we wanted to agree on common objectives. No one asked the Bloc either. The Bloc was completely cast aside and relegated to the side. So we want to understand how it started, how it was negotiated before we arrive to what has been made public. What has been agreed to? Are there signatures? Is there an official document that has been signed to seal the deal? Do we have an official document that will guarantee that we'll make it to 2025? Yes, something is public, but the backstory is not. It's like vaccines. We know that we have vaccines, but we never saw the contracts. It's the same idea.
Who's Mr. Johns?
So, first, just, maybe I'll just start with Mr. Macaulay. Like, I just got on this committee, and, we listened to what the Conservatives wanted. They put forward 2 studies and a bunch of witnesses. We prioritized them. Their official opposition made sure they got to do what they wanted to do, and next the Bloc. And I thought that was fair, the way the election played out. Government isn't even getting priority. They're actually behind. So I thought this committee was working pretty well, for the Conservatives especially. Now they bring forward this motion, and I've got a lot of concerns with this motion. Well, I will vote no. I can assure you that. But I think the big problem I have is that this is on the website. It's very clear. There are limited items in the agreement. They're vague. There is no fine print on it. But no, I'm not just going to adjourn this meeting. You want to bring us here? You want to bring forward a motion like this? We're going to sit here maybe and have a conversation. I have no problem with that. No problem at all. I got a lot to say about this. So, you know, I think I'll just, you know, cite that we are here to help people. We came here to help people. And the Bloc has voted with the Liberals before on issues that we haven't. They've negotiated. They did that throughout COVID. We saw that happen. The Conservatives had every opportunity to go and approach the Prime Minister and try to make an arrangement on certain items to keep, you know, to pass the budget or whatever issues. That was up to the Conservatives. They decided not to do that. We decided to help Canadians. And we went to the table and brought forward some items that we thought would benefit Canadians. And if we were going to make sure that we didn't have another unfair election, listening to what Canadians said, we wanted to make sure we got help for Canadians. That was our top priority. That's what we're here to do. And that's what we're going to keep doing. And if you look at our motions in the House of Commons, they are motions to help Canadians, not to create partisan politics, not to play games. I don't come here to play games with any of you. We come here to help people, to create jobs for Canadians, better way of life, a better environment, reconciliation, helping people that need help, not forgetting about communities that are forgotten. That's why we're here. We're here to help people, to work together. Motions like this don't bring us together. They are not designed to help people. Our agreement is online. There's nothing more to it. That's it. I'm happy to have this conversation. We can sit here all day. I'll sit here all night. We can talk about what's missing in this country, how many other motions we could have brought forward tonight to talk about. I'm happy to have that conversation anytime. And ways that we can help Canadians. I will talk all day about ways we can help Canadians. And more work that we all need to do together. Not just this agreement. This agreement is a starting place. Between two parties, we need to do more together. All of us. We have an obligation. So I'm done.
Thank you, Mr. Johns. I'm looking around the room and I do not see any more hands up. So with that, I assume the debate is done. I guess I will ask if you would like to call for the vote. Okay. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. All those in favor, please say yay. All those opposed, please say nay when I call your name. Mr. Bain?
I vote no.
Mr. Housefather? Nay. Mr. Jawari?
Nay.
Mr. Kuzmarchuk?
Opposed?
Ms. Katrakis?
I vote no.
Mr. Richards?
You're on mute. Yes.
Mr. Macaulay?
Yes.
Monsieur Paulus?
Oui.
Madame Vignola?
Moi, je m'abstiens là-dessus.
And Mr. Johns?
No.
Mr. Chair, the vote is yeas pour 3, nays contre 6.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I declare the motion defeated. Okay, with that said, we are at the end of the meeting. I would like to, first of all, thank the interpreters and the technicians for staying with us and the great work that they do, as well as our analysts. I would also like to point out to members of the committee that you will notice that on my right, the clerk today is Mrs. Burke, and Miriam is actually going to be filling at time to time for our clerk, for Paul. So please thank her for the great work she's doing, and we look forward. She brings a lot of experience to the committee. So thank you. And with that said, thank you everybody, and I declare the meeting adjourned.
Thank you.